Speaking of private companies, the Minister of Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, has advised participants in the concession and privatization of the country's assets to be more circumspect and inquire more about certain types of assets that are involved. He harped on the importance of conducting an audit of all assets that have been concessioned or privatized in order to achieve improved efficiency and asked if the objective of the exercise has been achieved. We are very happy to have, for this discussion, former Minister of Finance of Nigeria, Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu, to discuss privatization and so much more in Nigeria. Dr. Kalu, it is Your Excellency, I should say. It's an honor to have you, sir. Please.
Thank you very much.
Nigeria, where did privatization go wrong in Nigeria? What's your assessment?
Well, first, we can go briefly over why you want to privatize.
Yes.
You know, this is not a new policy instrument. It's been undertaken in Europe, Latin America, and other places. Essentially, is to reduce the burden on the public budget by moving those things that the private sector can do better into the private domain for all kinds of reasons. Supposedly should be more efficient, it should be more profit-geared, market-oriented, without all these hidden subsidies that usually come from operating a government entity. So where did we go wrong? Essentially, I think, although I've raised it to so many of those who are directly involved, you know, but there are 4 criteria. First of all, the entity should have enough deep pockets to be able to pay the price, not having to wait on getting financing from a local organization. So essentially, one of the benefits of privatization is a vehicle to get the economy moving to the global arena where you can have new capital. Ideally, it should be new capital and new expertise. Of course, introduction of new technology by those who will be taking over. So they are most aware of the stages of adjustment of different levels of technology. But if we seem to have overemphasized the issue of just whoever can pay, some people dispute that, obviously. Not just who can pay, but the transparency of the bidding process itself, so that we may end up giving to those who are not really equipped. As I said, there is the deep pocket, a second criterion that will be taken aboard simultaneously. The entity has to have a good understanding of the technology, whether it's power or it's refineries or any other end. They have to understand it. It's not after you manage to pay, then you start scouting around for partners, right, technical partners, and you don't really quite have the depth to vet those technical partners. Ideally, a third criterion, where you are looking at several applications, are those who have a prior experience in managing this kind of enterprise. So it's nothing brand new for them because they won this thing and they're just looking at how do we go about it. Lastly, and just as important, of course, is the plan that they bring forth. How do you proceed? So once you consider these 4 criteria, you can more or less feel quite comfortable that you've handed over, the government gets back its funds, they've handed over to a group that understands the technology involved, including whatever changes that will occur, because they're already in the business. And of course, they are able to maneuver their costs and expenditure patterns and skill development and so on. They know the business. The worst mistake you can make is to use this as one of, as I say, advantage for the boys, political advantage for whatever reasons, whether it's ethnic, religious, whatever, all those things should really not come in. And you are looking at a growing economy. Those who are so eager to own something, as we all like to do in Nigeria and in most other places, they just have to be patient enough. As the economy is growing, there will be other areas. But shortlist those who really know what they are doing. I think this is where you can say we probably made the big mistake.
Excellent. So I'm glad, yes, you've listed the criteria. So we haven't followed those criteria as far as, if we use the discos, power, for example, and that privatization.
Exactly. Well, we don't want to go into details of who, but you hear some of the big names we all know.
Right.
And of course, the big names will all say that, well, we are just the people to mobilize the resources. But you really need to go to the people that are established, like power, for instance, like the Honorable Minister was saying, to the point where I got alarmed when the notion started arising that, oh, well, maybe privatization cannot really take place over certain things. Some governments privatize even the military, the U.S. case of sending all kinds of troops to Iraq and Iran and so on and so forth. That's the extreme case, of course. But by and large, you can set up a structure whereby you can make this move. The government is relieved of all the burdens of having to fund all these, flour mills and all kinds of, easily marketable products, and let the private sector handle it. But the government has a role to play, like we had those who regulate it, just to oversee that there's no price gouging, that the benefits to the consumer, which is paramount, and that's why you need to give it to people who know what they're doing. The consumer doesn't have to be groaning and waiting and worrying about just costs rising every once in a while. As I say, we're not going to sort of hone in on any particular industry, but that's the general principle. So from in the same way, if we say, how do we correct it? I've been on a couple of programs before. Well, I know that, for instance, somebody like our Honorable Minister is a son. They are very concerned with the legal things. But there must be somewhere there in the contract that says, well, if you cannot perform in a particular way, we have to sit down and discuss what needs to be done. Maybe we can withdraw the contract, make some compensatory payments, and re-advertise for those who really can handle it better. Of course, the government will know how to stagger this so that we don't have a hiatus in resource supply and services provision for the consumer. But if people cannot perform clearly, whether refineries or power or what have you, the government just should be able to use this prerogative to say, hey, we have to sit down and talk about how to proceed. Not all this squeamish thing about contractual obligation and so on. If the consumer is not getting the service, that is the single most important business to review it.
Right.
And there are people, and in any case, we are members of the World Bank. Many countries, particularly the small ones, may not be able to afford the search that you need to make to get it. The World Bank can do it at their own cost. That's why we pay. We are members of the World Bank. Okay. You tell them what you want, they help you scatter around and give you a list of 10 companies to choose from, and you take it from there. And they can even sort of shop around you depending on what experience you have in this sort of thing. So those costs can be taken care of to make sure that you get the best companies. Best, of course, means that they are knowledgeable, they are least costs, they are reliable, and then the consumer gets benefit of the privatization exercise.
Fantastic. So again, we're not getting into specifics, but if we take a macro view of this administration and how they've handled privatization compared to administrations past, how would you assess things?
Well, for so many reasons, things haven't quite stayed on course. Some of these reservations weren't expressed right from the beginning. I left the Ministry of Transport, which was where I was when the privatization exercise I had written about much earlier was started. And I used to go up to BP and say, well, this is not really the way it was supposed to work. And the impression was that, well, some of these companies I thought about will not come because of our conditions, the economic conditions. So, of course, then you have to focus on correcting the conditions that will make it conducive to attract the best that will give you the best service. So I think over time we've had this problem. So it's difficult to highlight any particular deterioration. The problems have been there from the beginning. But you can say that with the environment we have now, obviously, it's much worse than before. Security is one. The fiscal environment, the fiscal monetary combination is not been very, very conducive to attract new investors into the area. So in that sense, you can say, obviously, the problems we've had with this administration in terms of the depth of and the underlying security concerns, obviously, anybody coming to a new terrain or anybody, a new investor, domestic investors are already being restricted in movements and so on. How much more those who are coming from across the border? So on that basis alone, you can say that, well, that's supposed to be a very dynamic process of finding who mans some of this. I mean, Nigeria is a major country, so if you're talking about power or the refining sector or some of the major industries that we agreed to privatize, like we talk about telecommunications,
yes,
you really need big ones.
Right.
But we have to distinguish between the very laudable effort that was made to bring in new companies, introduce new technology, new structures within the telecoms company. But a lot of people argue that we also sort of pussyfooted in actually privatizing the basic Nigerian nitel industry. For a while, government was handing on. But you see, and in power, you have the same kind of thing. At what stage do you move into it? It's not just generation and transmission and distribution. Nitel has the same thing in terms of the structure of the assets. The minister was just listing, talking about. Yeah. You have to look at the whole structure of the assets. And who better to do so than those who've already been in the business? It's not, with all due respect, it's not first grade or second grade public servants who know so much about these things. So you get the professionals involved. And even though the telephone privatization was lauded, but this was primarily because we allowed new companies to come in. We didn't say it was a government monopoly. But ideally, at the same time, there should have been competition to really walk over Nitel and bring in new companies. So the competition will be deepened and the services will spread even faster, although I must say that the penetration was quite impressive, given the experience we had before. So that should apply across the board to so many things. This effort at bringing in steel is another thing we should have made sure that we got the best people, whether it's the Germans, the Indians, the Americans, the British, whatever. But we started playing public sector again, instead of getting the private sector to move in there. They know the structure of the market. The structure of the market informs the range of products that you needed to produce and the kind of capital intensity of each stage. Those who are in the business know this, and they will bring in the requisite capital because they are driven by profit making. It's not a matter of jobs for the boys. Again, there will always be stage where you get to that. But the basic thing, you can't make the mistake of having a Nigeria steel, aluminum. Those should really be by private concerns that are established worldwide who can come in. They may come in for 5-7 years, by which time we're able to develop a local capacity to take over. But we can't be thinking of ownership without having the domestic capacity in terms of personnel and the type of structure of capital for the different kinds of term lending that will be required to get this thing ongoing. Yes.
You mentioned earlier about the fiscal monetary synergy, I guess, in the country. Our debts. Dr. Doyin Salami, who heads President Buhari's economic advisory team, put out a paper talking about high levels of debt and how he said privatization was one of the solutions. Those are debt levels. Do they alarm you when you look at
They are alarming, even for those of us. I had quite a stint at the World Bank. And one work with China just coming in, but Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, they were high-level borrowers because they were high-level performance. What I want to underscore is that in the first instance, the worry should not be over the volume of debt in whatever nominal or real terms, but the organizing to borrow has to be followed by a pre-appraisal of what you are borrowing for, in which that already tells you the kind of stream of capital inflow that will suit the if you like, the structure of benefits and costs stream for the project. As long as those benefit streams are above the cost stream, you don't worry about, we are borrowing too much, we are borrowing there. But one got the sense that we are just borrowing, and with the rising proportion of exhaustive expenditure in terms of current expenditure in relation to capital expenditure, it was really not quite clear whether we were taking enough time to do the due appraisal for what should be essentially capital projects or basic infrastructure projects, Or in fact, well, large social sector projects, which you can always rationalize by the impact they have on the overall economy in terms of inter-industry relationships. But so I think there are certain, you talk about the level of debt to the current
GDP,
revenue or current
debt service to revenue ratio,
or in terms of your total trade, so that you have enough foreign exchange to service the debt and so on.
Right.
And then, of course, you talk about the term structure of this debt, whether the interest rates, you see, well, our discussions here, for obvious reasons, people don't go into all these details, whether the interest rates are right or even whether the grace period is right, because the grace period is supposed to give you enough time to construct. So when you are repaying back from the
principal,
from the stream, from the operations.
Okay, the revenues that's
from
coming
the
in,
revenue stream, you know. But when you just talk about borrowing in the abstract, as if once it's a loan, it's a loan. But you have to take into account the interest, the grace periods, and of course the term structure in terms of maturity. So that gives you leeway. The higher maturities, of course, you want to mobilize for the heavy things that require a lot of time to build and set on stream. So that is the first sense of our debt. I think the sense is that we are pretty close to the top in terms of just the ordinary ratios to GDP or to government revenue or to the total budget. But even more importantly is that we need to take more time to assess the need to borrow, ideally how that borrowing will be repaid from the stream of benefits from the project. And of course, so that the terms of borrowing are so structured that you don't have to dip elsewhere to start paying before you finish, or because you are not generating adequate benefits from the revenue stream. So those are all the things we have to look at, not just in the absolute sense. But of course, Nigerians are obviously concerned because with all the problems we are having, and I also have to never underestimate the impact of the severe security issues, because that also puts a rush on your ability to select, the ability to get the best borrowers to lend to you, because they are also concerned with the security situation in the country. So that is a given in terms of why Nigerians should worry about the height of debt and the frequency of the borrowing.
Dr. Kalu, we have to have you back. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about privatization of assets, Nigeria's debt, and how to move forward. Former Minister of Finance, Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu, thank you so much for your time, sir. Really appreciate it.